Lord Nimon! Lord Nimon! It is I, Sardine.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the podcast taking you through the world of the Doctor Who novelizations put out by Target Books from 1973 onward in publication order. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. On Saturday, I was taking a walk with my child through our Brooklyn neighborhood. She is 12 years old and very much a fan of Stranger Things, and she was telling me different elements of Stranger Things fandom, including the idea of shipping, which of course I know something about. And then she said, I want to teach you two new words, she said to me. She says, I want to teach you the words canon and headcanon. Now, obviously my first thought is that, I may be old, but I certainly know what those words mean. So I interjected and said, I know those words, and I gave my definitions of canon and headcanon. And it occurred to me, I shouldn't have said anything. I should have just let her explain it to me. So there's a pro tip for the dads out there. Don't talk at your kids. But listen, it is great to know that the next generation of fans out there knows all about canon and headcanon and are taking their ideas into whole new fandoms. Speaking of fandom, in February I will be at Gallifrey 1 and I will be speaking on two different panels on the Friday. One about toxicity in fandom, and one about the 8th Doctor Adventures novels. I will have more information about that as time gets closer to the convention. In other Doctor Who news, we learned this week that the newest Blu-ray collection on the Classic Series DVD line is going to be Season 9. So now we're going to have all three of Katie Manning's seasons of Doctor Who on Blu-ray. There was a terrific 7-minute trailer for the box set written and directed by Pete McTighe, a very emotional tribute to Stuart Bevan, who passed away last year. Now, of course, Stuart Bevan was only in one Doctor Who serial, and that was nearly 50 years ago. But speaking of canon and headcanon, it's great to know that his character and the actor who played him remained a part of our Doctor Who lives for the next 50 years. And I certainly got very emotional at the tribute on the DVD trailer. This week, we are talking about Doctor Who and the Horns of Nimon, the 1980 novelization of the Doctor Who story that spanned the 1970s and the 1980s. I did discuss this book last year, 2022, on the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast with Tony Witt and crew. But as the format of this show is a little bit different from Tony's format, I encourage you to listen to this episode as well. I will try and raise some new points and find more interesting things to say about Horns of Nimon, both book and TV. Joining me this week in the endeavor is a returning friend, Ross Aitken, from several podcasts, Gallifrey's Most Wanted, and The Runcible Report, and Stop, Let's Team Up, the comics podcast. Ross and I are going to have very, very different takes on the novelization, but even though he and I are coming at it from very opposite perspectives, his take is very well worth listening to. Ross is larger than life, he is profane, he is glorious, and we're going to talk about lots of different things, not just Horns of Nimon. We are going to talk a little bit about the Season 2 Classic Series Blu-ray, which I will be covering on an upcoming episode of Trap 1, probably sometime in February. We're also going to talk about the seminal American sitcom, Different Strokes. And because we're both U.S. sports fans, we're going to talk about some American sports legends. Not things you often hear about on Doctor Who podcasts, but there you go. This is my show, and you're going to hear all about my interests. We're going to talk a little bit about basketball legend and accomplished author and activist and actor Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. We're also going to talk about my sometimes favorite sport, baseball. We're going to talk some Reggie Jackson. Reggie Jackson was a larger-than-life baseball superstar in the 1970s. He played in New York for the Yankees at a time that I was a young fan, just getting into baseball. This is before I discovered Doctor Who fandom and science fiction, and it's fair to say that based on Reggie's presence in New York, I was a Reggie Jackson fan even before I was a baseball fan. Case in point, in the 1977 World Series Game 6, Reggie Jackson hit 3 home runs in a game. It had been almost 50 years since somebody had done that in the World Series. When Reggie came to the Yankees earlier that year, he had said, "They're going to name a candy bar after me in this town." And sure enough, after his heroics in the series, they created the Reggie Bar in late 77 or early 78. The joke about the bar is that you open it up and it tells you how good it is. So, of course, April 1978, Yankee Stadium, opening day. What does Reggie Jackson do? He hits a home run. Every Yankee fan in attendance that day had been given a Reggie Bar, and the next thing you know, thousands and thousands of Reggie Bar wrappers, bright orange because this is the 1970s, get thrown down onto the field in celebration of Reggie. That's the kind of impact that Reggie Jackson had, and we'll talk about him for several minutes on this show. You are, of course, free to fast forward that bit to get back to the Doctor Who, but again, I try and bring as much of my own life into this show as I can, and that sometimes means going well off topic, and I hope you enjoy it. Now, not just Ross in the house, we also have Jim Sangster back this week to do a reading for us, a terrific reading from the Horns of Nimon novelization. Always a pleasure to have Jim Sangster on the show, and I am going to be wearing 2 of Jim's t-shirt creations at Gallifrey 1 in February. So if you're there, come check me out, come check out my panels, and come check out my Jim Sangster t-shirts. Meanwhile, we've got a busy program this week. One of the great things about talking with Ross is that he is ready to go as soon as you join the chat room, even before you have a chance to hit record. He has hit the ground running. So this conversation is joined already in progress, and I can't wait to share the results of the rest of that conversation with you. Let's get to it.
Hi, I'm Rupert Booth.
I am known as Paul Ferry.
And my name is Barry Williams.
Together, we host Time Ram.
Time Ram's a cruel mistress.
It's a random number generator.
That also.
We roll a number from 1 to 13, and that's our doctor. Then 1 to 300 for the story, and then we ram them together.
Even if it doesn't make sense.
Cruel, I tell you.
Time Ram, putting the wrong doctors in the wrong stories, so you don't have to.
You're listening to Doctor Who Literature.
The thing that makes Simon good is not in the book.
Graham Crowder.
Yeah. Yep, it is. Because it's a it's a turd. The script's a turd. But he's so engaged. I just watched Time Lash again, and I hate it. It's still terrible. But what's it, Paul Jericho?
Paul Darrow. Paul Jericho was that inanimate block of wood from the Five Doctors. Paul Darrow was playing Richard III.
Yeah, it's really one of my favorite lines when he just goes, "It's Malin Checker." It's like, Jesus Christ! How did you get away with that? I mean, I understand what John. If I was John Nathan Turner, I would have come out of the grid and go, "What the fuck are you doing?" But I would have said, "Bigger, all of you, bigger." I directed a play called The Kiss. It's about a woman president and a lesbian lover. It was written by the Five Lesbian Brothers, which is this comedy troupe. And they wrote this play, not a comedy. And it was so bad, I told my actors, talk fast, think you're on West Wing, and think it's a comedy. And they go, but it's not. I know, it's none of those things, but just talk fast. They were like, what? Is it just, this will sound better at like 1.5 speed. Because it's just it just would sound better. It was bad, but it was just if we treated it like we were doing West Wing, people would enjoy it more. Anything, because it was such a bad script. So, and it still was a shitty play. No one liked it. But I have a new recording space, and the cat doesn't have as much place to roam around, so she's looking. Do I walk on the keypad?
That's very similar to my experience with Smudge in the life of this podcast. Most of my recordings, she is sitting in front of me, staring directly into my laptop's webcam. So for some of my guests, they appear to be being interviewed by Smudge rather than me. Or Smudge stands directly in front of the camera and demands back scratchies, so whoever's talking to me sees a cat's flank and tail and my hands, but nothing else.
Oh
At
yeah.
least right now, Smudge is on the floor, so you can see my face, such as it is.
Oh yeah. Well, monkeys normally she just lays down. It's eventually she gives up walking around and she finds something next to me to lay on. She's the one that erased. Me, Jeff, Mark Cockrum, and I forget who the other person did a recording for Gallifrey, and she unplugged the recording device before I could power it down properly, so it erased everything. Luckily, Mark had a backup of everything. Because I went into a fucking panic like 5 minutes afterwards and messaged Jeff and said, I just lost the entire recording. Monkey unplugged the recorder. Because I used to loop it into this recorder until I discovered, till Mark Cockrum, I got better with Audacity. And I would record, I just would hit play and record the video on Skype and then play it while I was taking a shower, whatever, to get an audio. But then I got the MP3 plugin, and because someone goes, "Why is your stuff always in stereo?" Because that's the way it records, and I don't see a reason to merge it unless I have to. So.
Yeah, I'm on Dark Audacity. That gives you the option to split your track and go from stereo to mono or vice versa.
Yeah, I had some sound clips I had to put in a podcast, so I had to make everything mono because I couldn't find those sound clips in stereo.
The only reason I prefer mono is because I'm doing most of my listening to podcasts on a headset, and if I only have a voice coming out of one ear and out of the other ear, I don't hear so good. So I like to have both ears at the same time.
Yeah.
That's the advantage. But my editing skills are so rudimentary that I'm probably doing it all wrong. But so far, mono is the way to go for me.
Yeah, I'm just lazy. I mark down when I'm with Vic. Sometimes we'll go. I don't always have to listen to it again. Sometimes I can just chop off the beginning and end shit and go because we just had it straight through. But when we know we have to edit, one of us goes, "Okay, don't put that in." We just said something a little too like, that's going to be misinterpreted. Or that's too long. I've cut some of our tangents in half and 3/4. So.
I know one of the first episodes of Runcible Report that I listened to with you and Jeff, you edited out about 30 minutes of discussion of like Cheetos and Doritos.
Yeah, it was funny, and I thought I was going to keep it. I went, fuck that. That is just terrible. But like when Vic gets on her soapbox, fuck, man. I just quiet. And I leave 90% of it in. Every once in a while, as someone of mine and her's age and had been, I work for a gay theater company. My best friend's a lesbian. That there's certain things that we say about people in that community that were okay in like the 80s and 90s we would say about one another that I don't put out there because someone goes, "Oh my, I can't believe you said that." It's like, yeah, well, whenever there's a Doctor Who writer, Gareth Roberts, who now can't work because he's just a pig. But it's that bitter old queen. They're gay men of his generation that are absolutely prejudiced as shit.
He had made some comments about the trans community, seemingly unaware that is a not insignificant portion of Doctor Who's base, especially now that the main character is trans, with going from Peter Capaldi to Jodie Whittaker and back to Ncuti Gatwa. So that's just a case of not knowing who your audience is and playing to the exact opposite of your audience.
Yeah, you read the room. So, what sucks is he was a pretty good Doctor Who writer.
He was terrific. I mean, I was reading his books, his new adventures, his first one came out in 1993. Speaking of season 17 and the Horns of Nimon, to drag this thing back on topic, he did a series of Fourth Doctor / Romana 2 / K9 novels in the mid to late 1990s, and each one is better than the last, ending in the Well-Mannered War, which was the final missing adventure.
Yeah, I never read that one.
It's good. It's before BBC clawed the rights back from Virgin Publishing, and it ends with a very interesting demarcation between season 17 and season 18. So it could be a way of saying this is the last proper Doctor Who episode ever, and everything else after this is imaginary. So that was a clever way of ending the season 17 era.
Yeah, that's cool. I like Dying Days, that, and Well-Mannered War, like the last couple, I never read those. And then when and I've still not finished my first New Adventure book, because Time Worm Genesis is so bad. I've been reading that book for 35 years.
I read that in about 3 days. I bought that Thanksgiving 1991. That and Exodus were my first two New Adventures, and I read those both inside of 72 hours each, and I absolutely loved them because I was 18 years old. And it was my first time reading any Doctor Who book longer than a novelization.
Yeah. Yeah, see, but I read all the Missing Adventures for Virgin, and I read every Eighth Doctor and every BBC Missing Adventure. Because I didn't have TV for a while, and honestly, I mean this, the Eighth Doctor novel was my Doctor Who for, 8 years, 9 years? How long were those books coming out?
Oh, 8 or 9. Yeah, 97 to 05. And they just released the panels for Gallifrey 1 today. And I'm going to be speaking on an 8th Doctor Adventure panel. That's going to be pretty exciting.
Oh, man. I don't know if I'm ever going to get out there.
Yeah, they've got Jodie Whittaker this year. They've got Chris
Chibnall. I saw Chibnall got signed to come on.
Yeah, just announced last week as you and I record this, and he's going to be doing a bunch of on-stage stuff. I'll try and get up and meet him. I'm doing a couple of the Jodie Whittaker private events because how could you not? But I don't know if Chibnall's going to be doing any private events.
Yeah, well, I bet they'll just tag him in it. He'll want to hang out with her. And they'll, help take out some of the pressure off each other. Tennant and Tate are going to be here in Richmond in March.
Oh, wow.
A GalaxyCon. GalaxyCon, yeah, it's just one of them big cons with it just basically a vendor room. It's a mixed con. I got a picture with Armin Shimmerman one year and Jeffrey Coombs the next. Huh. My wife's like, why them? Because I like the bit part guys, man. Ron had Clint Howard's there every year. So is Barry Bostwick. They're there every year. So Shatner. Shatner's just going to work until he's in the box. It's like, dude, you're 91 years old. What the fuck? He's lost like 2 fortunes, though, from what I understand. So when he first divorced, he gave his wife every penny they had. All he did was kept a tract of land that he had a mobile home on. He gave her every penny, and he basically started over, and still paid child support for his 2 daughters, 3 daughters.
I think it was 2. And then he got a bunch of stock options from Priceline in the mid to late 90s, and he lost all of that when the market burst. And then when the bubble unburst, he was still working for Priceline 10, 15 years later doing commercials. So, yeah, he just keeps making the money.
Yeah, it's the nature of that profession. You normally do it until you die because it's, transitory. He's had 3 careers.
Have you read Clint Howard's autobiography? He and Ron did a joint book.
No, I did. I was reading up on him recently for something. He was at an event, and I really think I think they're great together. They're 2 great, because they're really just, they act like brothers. There's no pretense. It's just what 2 brothers would do. But how they turned out so different. Because Clint's a hardcore Republican.
Huh.
Mm-hmm. But he looks like a fucking hippie. Someone put a picture of him, and they said he looked like Oberon, Oberon's a character in DC Comics. He's the manager and sidekick to a character called Mr. Miracle, the greatest escape artist. And he's like 3 feet tall, and he's got white mutton chops. And it was perfect. He does look. He's a Jack Kirby character.
Ron Howard is the guy who got J.D. Vance elected to the Senate by mythologizing him and making that movie. So I guess the 2 of them are doing a lot of good work for the Republican Party.
Oh, did Ron Howard make that movie based on that terrible book?
He directed Hillbilly Elegy, and now J.D. Vance is a sitting senator.
That's terrible. I get those best-selling book. I don't think anybody should ever do them because they're always fucking terrible movies. That was one I did. I like Ron Howard movies, but I don't see. Because of that, what it was about. I was like, I'm not going to see that.
Well, speaking of terrible books.
All right, you ready?
This week. So the reason that I assign Horns of Nimon to you, number one, I think you asked for it. Number two,
yeah,
you and Jeff had done a really good breakdown of the season 17 Blu-ray box set on Runcible Report, and you had a lot of interesting stuff to say about season 17. And you reached a very interesting conclusion as to what was your favorite episode from that season. And the answer was
Creature of the Pit,
which is coming up in about 2 weeks on this program. I think Creature from the Pit is terrific, but Horns of Nimon for me is comfort watching on television. I never get tired of it. In 2010, on election night, when the Republicans swept the House and there was like an 80-seat swing, I knew that I didn't want to watch the returns because it was going to be too much, but I had just gotten the Nimon DVD in the mail. It had just come out. So I spent the whole night watching the Horns of Nimon DVD, and in between each part, I would do a quick dive through my phone and see how many seats the good guys had lost. And Nimon kept me sane, and ever since then, it's been my go-to comfort story. So I was curious to get your take, number one, on Nimon the episode, and then secondly, Nimon the book, which we're here to discuss.
Oh, I think, okay, hold on a second. I would like to. I love the book. How do I put this? I do not love the TV one, but I can watch it because it's so bad it's good. And Graham Crowden, it's just to see an actor of that caliber chew the scenery. You know, it's glorious. It is, and now that I can. I used to dread season 17, but I've met so many people who love it because they were seeing it as kids. I understand why a kid loves that. I saw it as a 20-something-year-old man. But now that I've gotten older, I've watched all these things 10, 20 times. I can watch it and I'll be entertained. I don't turn it off, because I know that the hammy acting between Baker and him is coming out. And it's an odd season because these are all, if I was to say, I wouldn't put any of them in my top 5, top 10 Baker, but the season has a certain, it has its own voice that no other season has because it's all over the place, and there's some of them are quite, it's like, well, did you really think this out? Did you think this out, really? The Nimon costumes, they're wearing sheer pantyhose, black sheer pantyhose. It's like awful, but it's funny. And I think I asked you now that I'm remembering that I did ask you to give me the book. I was hoping the book was one of those ones where there was a flourish added to it, or something was added to it. And it's like a Cliff Notes to a bad book. That's what I feel like I'm reading. I'm reading the Cliff Notes. There's in America, British listeners, we had these little yellow books that gave you all the pertinent points of a novel so you didn't have to read it and you could do a term paper on it.
If you want to get a sense of what Cliff Notes are, you go to the classic 80s sitcom Different Strokes, season 8. There's an episode of Different Strokes where Arnold, the late Gary Coleman, is in English class in high school and is assigned to read A Tale of Two Cities. And he and his friends, one of whom later went on to be the evil older brother on Wonder Years, he and his friends decide to read the Cliff Notes instead of Tale of Two Cities because the text is too hard. Now, they don't use the phrase Cliff Notes, and they don't use the distinctive yellow...
That's a brand name, isn't it?
Yeah, they couldn't use the brand name or the image, so they created their own in-universe version of Cliff Notes called Pete's Condensed Classics. So they read that book instead of the actual text. And the
God.
teacher, who happens to be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, by the way, please subscribe to his Substack. It's the greatest thing ever. But Kareem Abdul-Jabbar plays the English teacher, and he gets wind of what Arnold is doing, and he writes a test that you can only pass if you have read the actual text of the book and not the Cliff Notes version. So Arnold and his friends fail. And Kareem is waving around the Cliff Notes saying, these are very valuable study tools, but it's not a replacement for reading the book itself. That's why you failed this test, because you didn't read the book.
Good morning, class. Never in 15 years of teaching have I seen anything like this. Obviously, only a handful of you decided to read the book.
I read it twice, Mr. Wilkes.
Enough, Lisa. One of the few intelligent remarks were Arnold Jackson's comments on the opening lines.
I'm saved.
Unfortunately, that wasn't nearly enough.
I'm unsaved.
Class, these books were not assigned to make your lives miserable.
No, that's what non-dairy cream is for.
Now, class, you're freshmen now, and I've tried to treat you like young adults. But obviously, with this class, I was wrong. I can't teach a class that refuses to learn. And this class refuses. I'm going to try and say it one more time. You're expected to behave like young adults.
Just when a young adult get yelled at like this.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. You've just volunteered.
Me? What I volunteer for?
Starting Monday, you're going to teach the class A Tale of Two Cities from page 1, alone.
What?
And then, this is the icing on the cake, Kareem takes Arnold's test paper, crumples it up, tosses it into the waste paper basket, and misses. Which is perhaps the greatest meta in-joke on the history of American television.
Oh, God. There was a form of comic, there was a comic book, and it's in comic, you may have heard of it, it's called Classic Comics.
Oh, yeah.
And it was basically novel adaptations. So you'd have, Robinson Crusoe, Three Musketeers, Last of the Mohicans, done in comic form, in like 64 pages originally. Because I think it started coming out when comics were still a dime, and you had 64 pages of story. So it was like a 70-page, 80-page magazine. And I've seen Mark Twain, Huck Finn, someone did it from the the running gag is, what did you do this book report on? Did you read the Classic Illustrated?
Mm-hmm.
So, but this is, I think for the book, I want to say this about the book, but there's a period of the book where they're really thin, and what is this? It's not even 110. Is it 100? It's 110 pages because there's only one sentence on the last page.
And it starts on page 7, so if you subtract, it's really 104 pages plus one line of actual text.
Jeez. I mean, I read half of it like 2 weeks ago, and then I picked up where the bookmark was, and I went, thank God I know the story, because I don't remember the book. I don't remember what I read. I just, that's where in the show I am, was the thing that popped in my head. And I even Googled, was there any changes? And there's not a lot on Horns of Nimon on the internet.
So you'll be able to listen to my audio essay about the book, which is going to play directly after your segment in the episode as finished. You're going to hear a 6-minute dramatic reading of the prologue by Jim Sangster. And it's terrific because the prologue is epic. And the prologue adds a dimension to the story that is most decidedly not there on television.
Oh, yeah, the history of the planet. Yeah, I did like that when what is it? Saldeed comes back after going in there and just kills the guy. Because he's and I had hoped when reading it that it would be that good. He would put some flourishes in it.
And especially as Jim Sangster is going to read the prologue for us, he takes it to the next level. But here's a list of what Terrence Dicks wrote in 1980, and then maybe you'll understand why this book is 105 pages long. January, Book 1, Underworld. February, Book 2, Invasion of Time, which is 137 pages, one of his longest. That's about as long as the Target books were allowed to get in those days. March, Book 3, Stones of Blood. April, Book 4, Androids of Tara. May, Book 5, Power of Kroll. June, Book 6, Armageddon Factor. September, Book 7, Nightmare of Eden, last week's show. October, Book 8, Horns of Nimon. November, Book 9, Junior Doctor Who on the Brain of Morbius, which we are not covering. November, Book 10, Monster of Peladon.
That's a pretty good book, isn't it?
And immediately before that, in November of 79, he had done Destiny of the Daleks. So this is a dude, my dude writes 11 books, I think, in 14 months. But that's it. I'll say it later. This is the inflection point. After 1980, Terrence no longer writes more than half the books in any given year. After season 17, Terrence no longer is writing more than half of the novelizations for any given season. So as you read Horns of Nimon, you are watching the torch getting passed to a new generation of writers. 1981, Terrence does 2 books, and that's it. 1982, Terrence does 2 books, and that's it. So from here on out, on this show, we're getting a lot less Terrence. This is basically the end of Terrence writing 100-page novels in a week and a half.
I mean, I understand what he's writing for. I mean, I remember being a little kid, and we had. I assume you had Scholastic book fairs.
Oh, love those.
Yeah, I did too, man. I was a bit avid reader, and this would be something. And I've said this on my podcast before, that I took a milk crate full of these to college with me, and this is what I carried in my bag when I didn't want to read, Uta Hagen's Theory on Acting, which was our textbook. Well, no, it's a great book. And I'm glad I went to a school that taught Uta Hagen and not Meisner or Stanislavski. I mean, Hagen is kind of Stanislavski. It's just less pretentious. But, I needed something to kill 10, 15 minutes, go over to a buddy's apartment to kill time before I had to go back to class, I always had a book in my bag, so I brought those. And they, but I remember certain ones being really good, like some of the early ones, and then I think some of the Ian Marter ones, ones after this one, the way you're talking about, where people were writing their own stuff, and
Oh, Ian Marter was. We've had a few Ian Marter episodes. There's more to come, and Ian Marter is definitely thinking about what it's like to live in the universe he's writing. He does the 5 senses, which a lot of writers don't do. He tells you what things look like, smell like, sound like. Terrence is terrific at doing fast-paced action sequences, but Ian Marter is much more into graphic body horror. And that's why Ian Marter is given a book like The Invasion, which talks about cyber conversion. That's why Ian Marter is given Earthshock, where the androids' weapons liquefy the troopers. Terrence never takes it to that level. Terrence just gives you, the sanitized version of the story. And Nimon is a story that plays into Terrence's strengths because it doesn't really there's elements of the body horror like the dried husks, but he doesn't have to go to an Ian Marter-like level to tell a story.
Yeah. I mean, I think he also thinks people are, I don't know, because they didn't have repeats. I always get to the point where these books are so important because they were, for a lot of Who fans, in England, you didn't get reruns. We could see it all day long. So this was it. And for me, some of these, I read this book before I saw this story. I mean, but I think these books were the only way that someone could have them. And I'm trying to think of like an American Boys book that you could have gotten at Scholastic that were like this little. I mean, the Hardy Boys, something like that.
The original Hardy Boys were hardcovers.
Yeah, well, I mean, we had them, but they were a little thicker.
There was a slimmed down line of Hardy Boys paperbacks in the 90s that were much lower age level than Target, but about the same size as the Targets. Just much more juvenilely written.
Well, I think some kid would know this would be a YA book in a way, because it's Well, not even this book nowadays would be for a much younger audience than it was written for then.
I mean, I literally named my daughter after a Hardy Boys character, so I was reading the Hardy Boys for most of grade school, and then as soon as I retired from the Hardy Boys, the novelizations came in and filled the void. So
yeah, we had some in my house and some Nancy Drew. Yeah, we had some, and my brother's an avid reader, so I was giving, when I was, and I still have him. He gave me the entire Riverworld saga, Philip Jose Farmer science fiction novel series for my 13th birthday, and I still have all the volumes he gave me. I've had to replace them so I could read them, but we had the Hardy Boys, and I have three sisters, so there was some Nancy Drew in the house too. So. And my mother had a almost complete run of first edition Wizard of Oz books, all but the original. I don't know. My sister Liz inherited them. She was the last one who was allowed to read them because my mother started to realize that they were valuable, and these are just for look. These are no touch. I will buy you a paper, but you're not. But we didn't have the Wizard of Oz one. Someone had borrowed it from her when she was a kid, and she never got it back. Because it was like her mom's or something. So, but this is, I don't know. I wanted to really like it. I mean, I definitely took time to put Graham Greene's voice in there as best as I could. Not Graham Greene, Graham Croydon voice in it, because he really makes it. The show is so much more watchable because he is just magnificently over the top without being. I mean, there's a point where being cheesy and being over the top is annoying, and there's times where like, oh, you're purposely doing this because this is the best choice possible. So
I can tell you, and I've probably told this story on the podcast before, but it's a weekly show and not everybody hears every episode, so I don't mind repeating myself. I would have been just about 12 when this aired on my PBS station for the first time. So it probably airs autumn of 85. I'm just about 12, maybe a few days before, maybe a few days after. And they're showing it one episode a night. So, part one, next night, part two, weekend, then Monday is part three, whatever. I was so mesmerized and riveted by Graham Crowden, of whom I would never have heard before, being an American. My mother might have seen him on one of her PBS imports, but I certainly would not have known who he was. I just knew that I loved watching him act. So part three airs, and I haven't read the book yet. I don't have the novelization, so I don't know how it's going to end. Literally all the next day until 7 p.m. when the episode finally airs on PBS part four, I was spending the whole day in anxious distress wondering, is Soldeed going to survive the story? Because if he doesn't, that means Graham Crowden is not going to be in the full episode, and I'm going to be very, very upset. So we were having dinner, and I couldn't get away from the dinner table until around 7:15, 7:18, whatever. And I had the episode taping on my one VHS tape my dad gave me. Just tape, rewind, taped over a lot of good stories. So I turn on the TV and I watch the last 6 minutes of the episode, and Soldeed is nowhere to be seen. And I'm like, oh no, he must have been killed off because he ain't in the last 6 minutes. As soon as 7:25 comes, episode ends. I immediately rewind the tape and watch the whole thing again. And I see him, and he's great. And his death scene, which I'll play the audio of later on in this recording, is one of Doctor Who's best moments ever. It's not serious. It's not certainly not. It doesn't have a lot of dramatic depth, but it's so good because you have Lila Ward is acting her, well, not pants. She's acting off her fox hunting outfit in this scene, and she is yelling at him with Kim Wexler like fury. It has to have been an inspiration on some of Ray Seahorn's better moments on Better Call Saul. That's how good Lila Ward is. And I can't give better praise than Kim Wexler quality acting. But Graham Crowden is going off in entirely another direction, and he is just cackling to his death. And watching the two of them in that scene, they're not on the same page, but it works so well. So even though I'm not 12 anymore, I still find few things as entertaining as Graham Crowden in this story. And maybe if I had seen it when I was 25 and a little more cynical, I might not have had the same opinion. But seeing this story when I did, Graham Crowden has imprinted himself upon my soul. And that's another reason why I love this story so much.
Well, and that's fair because I think I saw this at like 85 is when it came out. I was 20, 21. And yeah, I was jaded. I think all 21 years old are. But I also saw a show kind of like I was at that point to where I was really kind of reading the history. I got the magazine. It's pre-internet, but there were Paul Hanning books. I got all that shit. I just saw the show kind of like, oh, this is the way the show's going. It's like, and then I loved the next season, 18. I didn't like it as much as I do now, but I went, oh, okay. But it's just they don't compare to me. I hate to say it, because I enjoy Nimon, the actual story, more now than I ever did. And I think next time I watch it, I will enjoy it. I also didn't have enough time. I didn't get a chance to read. Normally, when I guessed it, I have watched the material and read the material, so I have a fresh take. But I was like, I've got so much on my plate, and I still haven't finished my season 22 box set. And they announced the date for season 2. So
I bought my season 2, region 2 from the UK because I'm hosting the Trap 1 episode. Jeff is going to be a panelist on that. We're going to record in a couple of weeks. So I'm working my way through the very fancy UK season 2 box set. It's absolutely amazing and incredible, and you can read the original scripts from the 60s and then compare and see how Hartnell changed and altered the dialogue to fit his style. And the extras, I cannot recommend season 2 enough.
I can't wait. I just wish I had some of those and I sold them because I bought those. I bought the UK and the US because, I don't always have access to my region-free player. I'll just buy region-free players from now on. I'll just pay the extra $10. It's like $10. But I do love these sets. I do love them. Even the American ones, which is just a clamshell in the discs. They're just amazing. And season 2, I will stop watching anything else probably for about 2 weeks because I'll watch everything. I love In the Sofa. I love the new documentaries. The In Conversations.
Matthew Sweet.
Oh my God. When there's one time in every interview where he asks a question that the person being asked it did not expect it coming and was so happy that the question was asked that they go on 10 minutes about something really not Doctor Who-ish, but really gives you an idea of who the person is. I even didn't want to punch Michael Gray in the face, but maybe 6 or 7 times. Because he's just an obnoxious, he's a producer. He doesn't have any taste. But that's not his job. Because he keeps saying, yeah, it went on, but I told him to can it. Because that was my job. And I went, okay, that's fair enough.
I'll just caution you, the William Russell interview is very, very hard to take because
he's not there as much, poor guy.
One of the guests, and I'm not going to say which guest it was, but it was a performer who was in Power of the Doctor. One of the guests at Li Who was telling a story about William Russell's day on set recording his 6 words of dialogue for that closing scene. And the story was told in a comical / whimsical / heartwarming way. But you have to question, at what point is it elder abuse to put him out there when he doesn't honestly have the faculties to read a single line of dialogue? So when you're listening to him answer Matthew Sweet's questions, and they make clear that this was recorded 4 years ago because there's a 2018 chyron at the beginning of the interview.
Okay.
It is clear that William Russell's faculties have significantly eroded, and he's giving very vague, possibly or absolutely, he's giving very vague answers that you can interpret however you want. Now, there's a couple of moments in there where he gives crystal clear memories of things that happened in the 1940s. And that's the real William Russell shining through.
Me and Vic saw him speak at Regen in Baltimore, at the last Regen Con, which would have been about 18. So they asked him all the Doctor Who questions, and he was a little like, he's 90. He's getting a little, my father died at 92. There's just a point to where they're there. their faculties are all right. They're just the ability to communicate's gone back, and they really just don't want to. I think my dad was like, he called me by the wrong name, but he knew it was me. But because I have 3 brothers, he can only remember a name. But my stepmother, he knows who you are. You're not. He knows you're not Huey.
Yeah.
Just those are the. But Russell was talking, and he was the answers we'd always have. They're not that detailed. He's not really into answering them. And me and Vic, I think, we're kind of sitting back. Is he disinterested, or is he having difficulties? Then they asked him about his son. And he went on a 10-minute story about his son was doing his West End debut in a 2-man show with Alfred Molina.
Wow.
And how proud he was. And how much he loved his son, and how powerful it was to see his son working with that actor as an equal on stage. So he's impressed because he's an actor, and he's like, I never got that moment. That's a moment I didn't get. I was Lancelot, and I was Ian Chesterton, and I taught theater. I taught acting, But my son was one of the stars of a 2-man show in the West End. He's doing American television. He just was gushing. At that point, his son was on How to Commit a Murder over here. So it was great. So, yeah, I mean, I'm glad that the interview was then, because when I saw him at Regent, he was me and Vic have a picture with him, and he's making a weird face, and it's more like, who's everybody? I think he's overwhelmed by everybody getting a picture with him.
On the same disc, the Planet of Giants disc, when you get your season 2, there's an interview that he and Carol Ann Ford did in 2011 when they were recording the reconstructed part 4 of Planet of Giants. That is William Russell. He's engaged, he's witty, he's funny, he's clever.
I watched all that stuff last time I watched Planet of Giants on the original DVD. And I'd never watched it. I had never watched that.
Wow.
I didn't even know it was on it. I was like, I think when I got The Rescue, I've always loved The Rescue. But I love The Romans. It is one of my favorite Doctor Who's of all time. It is my second favorite historical. And it is just them going, we can do comedy. Look, it's easy. It makes it look easy. And I love it. It's like, you should have kept doing that. Because that was neat, having that one comedy. Verity was smarter than, They tended to end up being the historicals, which I think a little bad. But you could do, it was a good thing for the show that, look, we can do drama, we can do space opera, we can do, whatever. But we can do comedy, which is not always easy. So, and he's so good, and he's great in that. He's always the funny one. I think they gave him the jokes for a reason, because he does do the jokes in most, I don't think Carol Ann Ford could probably be that funny.
It is funny when you read the production documentation, mostly memos from Verity Lambert. They were very unsentimental about getting rid of Carol Ann Ford. They didn't want her around, and you have to wonder why. And when she's doing the Behind the Sofa for Dalek Invasion of Earth, she's still rightfully bitter about the way that her character was written and the way that she was ushered out of the show. So it's great that she's coming back to do all the supplementary materials, but she was clearly not treated well by the people in charge.
No, and me and Vic just covered Rescue, and we talk about it's like, they discarded her, and then they tried to, Maureen O'Brien, want to dye your hair black? She goes, no, you had an actress that looked like that. Just bring her back.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. So, yeah, but, that's, I think that happens a lot in the 60s. I think Maureen O'Brien gets it from another producer. Just gets discarded,
John Wiles comes in, does one recording with her, and then he fires her during the season break between Galaxy 4 and Mythmakers. Just says, goodbye, we don't want you anymore. Your mouth is too big. Because she was talking back during table reads.
See, that's a good thing,
That's what you want.
Maybe you want somebody in.
She found out she was getting sacked when she read the last script for Mythmakers. Terrible people in charge.
Yeah, well, there's a reason the show suffers. I think his third season is, season 3 is a little choppy. There's some gems, and then there's some ones like, what were you thinking? But then again, it was John Wiles. So, but, All right. So I will give this a rate. I'm going to give this book a rating, and I'm just like, it's a 3. I want to, it's bad. It's like, I'd like to be witty and bash it.
All right, when you say 3, you got to give me a frame of reference. There's a very famous baseball story, and you're the only other baseball fan who comes on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Reggie Jackson is in the Yankees clubhouse, and he's holding court. And Reggie says, and if you don't know who Reggie Jackson was, he was a very outspoken, very in-your-face baseball player / media personality. Played for the Oakland A's for 10 years, beat my Mets in the World Series the week I was born. Comes to the Yankees on one of the first big free agent contracts. And a reporter says to him, "Oh, you've come to New York to be a star." And he goes, "No, I brought my star with me because I was already a star out in Oakland." And he gives an interview with Sport Magazine where he's bashing all of his brand new Yankees teammates. And the article comes out, 6 pages long, and it makes him look terrible because he's being very brash. And as an athlete of color, at the time, he was supposed to know his place and not say anything.
Yeah.
So his teammates get on him. "How could you say all this stuff about us?" And he goes, "I was misquoted." And one of them, when somebody shoots back, "You were misquoted for 6 full pages?" So then he says, "I have an IQ of 179. And Mickey Rivers, who's a very witty, very funny Yankee, named for the poet John Milton, but goes by Mickey, John Milton Rivers, he shoots back 179 out of what, 1,000? Which is one of the great insult comebacks, and I try to use that whenever I can in my daily life. Then Reggie gets suspended for insulting both the owner of the team and his manager at the same time. Serves a 5-day suspension.
It wouldn't be that. It was George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin, wasn't it?
One's a born liar and the other's convicted. That was his famous quote. It cost him a week of the 78th season. Yankees win the World Series anyway, but that was a tough week. So he comes back from his 5-day suspension, and one of the reporters goes, "Hey, Reggie, what were you thinking when you were suspended for 5 days?" And he pauses and he looks off camera and he goes, "The magnitude of me."
Because I can't stand him. Even when he would come back and put on an A's uniform, it's like, I still think you're a dick.
Yeah, he finished his career with the A's in '87, but the New York Mets should have drafted him. The Mets had the first pick of the amateur draft in which Reggie went, which is either 66 or 67.
Who was in charge of the Mets then? Was it Casey?
It was a racist, and I forget who it was. It may have been George Weiss. I don't rightly remember anymore. I could look it up. But the Mets got a report back from their scout that Reggie is an undergrad at the University of Arizona, and Reggie is Black Hispanic, Reginald Martinez Jackson. His girlfriend is Jenny Campos, who's white Hispanic or light-skinned Hispanic. And whoever the scout was reports back to the Mets owners, "You can't draft this player because he's in an interracial relationship." So the Mets pass on signing Reggie Jackson, and they sign Steve Chilcott instead.
Who?
You don't have to be a baseball fan to know that Reggie Jackson played in the major leagues for 21 years and set all kind of records, multiple World Series MVP. Steve Chilcott never played a day in the major leagues.
Yeah.
So the Mets chose to take an unqualified white guy over Reggie Jackson, and they suffer the consequences.
Yeah, and Oakland being the town it is, that it really didn't matter if he was in an interracial. It's, I'm going to be very sad when the A's move to Vegas.
Is that a done deal, or is that still a speculation?
It's more likely than the other. It's kind of 60-40 now. Yeah, I'm not happy. Because I embrace all of it. I have a Philadelphia A's hat. I have 2 Kansas City A's hats. I want to stay an A's fan, but hate Las Vegas. I've never been. I don't see a reason to go to Las Vegas. Maybe to go see a really good stand-up comedian. But that'd be about it.
I'm just going to say the only reason that I bring up Reggie Jackson, and again, I've got my baseball bona fides. I am the only person in history who's been acknowledged in both a Doctor Who book and the baseball prospectus, so I come by it honestly. But I will say that when Reggie says my IQ is 179 and Mickey Rivers says out of what, 1,000? You said you're giving this book a 3. So I'm asking you what? 3 out of what, 1,000?
3 out of 10. 3 out of 10. Because, I mean, I do like the intro. You know, it's still a Doctor Who book, so it's going to get, it's just like the SAT. You get a point for putting your name on it. So, you know, I'd rather read a Doctor Who novel than not have any Doctor Who, you know. I mean, I do love the Target books. I'm glad I have them, glad I read them all. But I hope the next one I get one of the bigger ones.
No. Well, be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you wish for.
Oh, good God.
So, Horns of Nimon, you are okay with the TV story. You are not okay with the book. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. I find pleasure in watching the TV song. I still don't think it's good television or really that great of Doctor Who, but it's really fun. I mean, it is. There's aspects of it that are great. I will say my ultimate biggest problem is the set is terrible in certain sections. And I think it's watching it on a 52-inch screen Blu-ray doesn't help. So, because the last time I watched it was on the TV by my mother-in-law got a TV upgrade, so I got her a TV, so it's my office television. And it was just like, wow, that's just a little too crisp. I could see that. It's not as bad as Nightmare on Eden, the big red button by the elevators.
Oh, yeah. Well, as Jim Sangster said a couple of weeks ago on this show talking about Keys of Marinus, you have to look at these things as theater. Theater is a metaphor. It's not actually a lion on stage playing Simba. It's a man wearing a lion-shaped hat. When you're watching Driving Miss Daisy, it's not actually an automobile on stage. It's two stools, and they're sitting at an angle, so one appears to be the driver and the other appears to be the backseat passenger. You have to look at these old, low-budget Doctor Who stories as black box theater in front of a camera, and you have to forgive some of the design choices. That being said, Graham Williams did not milk as much money out of his budget as his predecessors, Barry Letts and Philip Hinchcliffe, did. So ordinarily, at this point, we're about 50 minutes into the recording. This is where I'd ordinarily segue into a game. So before we do Guess That Cliffhanger, we'll play it. I want to ask you about the sequel to this story. There's no novelization for it yet, so it's probably not going to be covered on Doctor Who literature. They just announced the new spate of Target books for 2023. This story's not on there. But it's a Matt Smith story that is a soft sequel to Horns of Nimon.
God Complex, which is my favorite Doctor Who the last couple times I have done a poll.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was getting at. I love that story. And it's great, even before you realize it's a Horns of Nimon sequel, it's a great story. And then when you realize how well it slots into the Nimon continuity, it gets even better. So talk to me about why God Complex is such a terrific story.
Just the concept of it. I like the fake hotel in space. Everybody's fear is in a room. Anything that's going to make them lose faith. As someone who used to be a person of faith, you know, I have different faith now, but, you know, I kind of like that. What effect? The actor, I wish I could remember the actress's name who plays the young nurse. She's fabulous. I'm like, fire Rory and Amy, make her the companion, just leave them here.
If you watch the very first episode of Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone revival, she's in that playing the main character's girlfriend, and she has, I think, an American accent. She's a phenomenal actress, and I always learn her name and then forget it. But she is definitely terrific.
Oh no, that's just the whole episode works, and it's in a season that I like, but it's a little all over the place. But there's just this one story in the middle where it's all very confined. and the fears are very real. Take a shower. The kid that's freaked out about the gym coach making him take a shower, and that's what zaps him. The guy afraid of ventriloquist dummies.
That's right.
It's really, and it's just creepy. It's just, and David Willems is so good.
Oh, yes, playing the Tavolian.
Yeah, it's just a great episode because, and I think it's one of those ones that people like older fans who really like old Who, and except new Who is now I have Who, but aren't as big of fans. And there are ones, that's one I know a lot of them like. I know people who don't like Matt Smith like that episode. I know guys who don't like Stephen Moffat. And he didn't write it, did he? No, he didn't write it.
No. I think he wrote the last 10 minutes, which takes place off the space station in a different continuity.
Yeah, he writes the setup for the finale.
Several attempts to write out Amy and Rory, but yeah, the actual bulk of the episode itself was not written by Stephen Moffat.
He would have gone bigger on this, and this one just doesn't go big. It never crosses that line.
So this was written by Toby Whithouse, not Stephen
That's
Moffat.
why it's good. Okay, that's why it's good. I like Toby. I prefer Toby's stuff. Did he also do Under the Lake?
Yes, he did. And yeah, he did that. He did Under the Lake Before the Flood. He did everything. He started with School Reunion, which I love, and then his last one is Lie of the Land, which is the underrated Monk trilogy in Capaldi's last season.
Is it the last part of it? That's a really weird 3 episodes in the middle of a season where I'm going, do I like you or do I hate you? The last one I like because you got a lot more Nardole in it, and Nardole and Bill is always good. I like that season because I love that. It's a TARDIS team I like, those 4 of them.
Yeah, I think that whole trilogy is, again, when I watched it the first time, I was frustrated because I was waiting for a big revelation and it never comes. But when I was finishing my new series Pilgrimage in 2022, I watched those 3 episodes in 3 nights, and I was very impressed, and I think it all holds up much better than people remember. Because when you're no longer watching it with expectations, when you're just watching it, already knowing how it's going to turn out, it's really good. Let's go back to the classic series.
Okay.
Let's do a quick lightning round of Guess That Cliffhanger. You're going to get 3 cliffhangers. You're going to have to name for each one the name of the story and the episode that it ends, be it part 1 or part 4 or part 7.
Oh, fine. This is going to be embarrassing. All right.
So here is your first clue.
One thing I did see, by the way. Name of that ship we were on.
What was that?
The Mary Celeste.
Mary Celeste?
Vicky? Any change, Doctor?
I altered the curve we were traveling on. For one moment I dared hope we'd lost them. They must have detected the change and followed their close on our track.
But surely we've got our 12-minute lead still.
I'm afraid not. It's down to 8. It will be reduced even further after our next landing. We must trace the facts. The Daleks are closing in on us.
It's a chase. It's one of my favorite Dalek stories. I'm going to say episode 4?
Somewhere in what we just heard, they talk about one of the places they just left. That should be a clue as to which episode it is.
Well, that's what I was thinking, and I thought Mary Celeste, and then they're getting close to the end, so it would be 4 going into 5. So maybe...
I'll give you the point for the story. It was actually episode 3. Episode 3 is Empire State Building / Mary Celeste. Episode 4 is the Festival of Ghana, the haunted house.
See, that's where I thought they were going to land. But I was thinking this stuff was all later in the story. How long are they on the sand planet? 2 episodes?
They land on the sand planet halfway through episode 1, but then episode 2 is the only episode that has the sand planet people with the fish heads in it.
Wow. All right. At least I got the story right.
Well, You only need 4 points to pass. You've got 1. So here is your next clue.
Stay where you are.
Listen, we tell you the truth and you don't believe us. You accuse us of crimes we haven't committed, now you're going to have a shot. I think after a long journey, that's a bit too much, Marshal. K9, lights! Goodbye, Marshal. Come on.
Stop them! Stop them!
Come on, run.
Where to?
Back to the TARDIS.
Doctor! The TARDIS. It's gone.
That is your second clue. It is clearly a Tom Baker story, but do you know the name of the story? And do you know?
It's Armageddon Factor. It's a 6-parter. I'm going to say episode 3.
And how did you deduce that?
It had to be about midway. I'm just guessing at that point. Because it takes them a while to get to the planet and meet the Marshal.
All right, I'm going to give you a hint here. This will be your only hint of the contest. It is a 6-part story, and it's structured 2, 2, and 2. So the first 2 episodes take place on one planet, the second 2 take place on another planet, and then 5 and 6 take place on a third location. So this episode takes place on the planet where the Marshal lives because the Marshal is in set. And then the Marshal's not in the middle parts of the story because he's stuck in a time loop.
All right, so it was 4. Wait a minute. Now I'm confused. Okay, it's 2. It's the end of 2.
All right, it's close. It's not. It's actually the end of 1.
Oh my god! Really? See, I mean, maybe we're watching that one is a hard watch for me because it's really bad. There are bits and pieces I like, but it's that poor Tom Baker had some bad finishes for seasons when they ran out of cash or whatever it was.
Anthony Reed departs as script editor halfway through that story, and Douglas Adams comes in and finishes editing the story and rewrites the ending. So it's a good.
The back end's a little better.
It's a good try. We just covered that on this show a couple of weeks ago with Paul Scoons as my guest, and the last episode has that infamous bit where Tom Baker starts waggling his eyes and talking about how much power he's going to have now that he has the key to time, and he's faking it for Romana's benefit. But that is considered by some, not by me, but it's considered by some as an example of Tom Baker's worst acting excesses during the Graham Williams era. And here is your third and final clue.
We have a fix on the time transfer device. It is operating again in the 20th century time zone, and it must be them.
You have obtained the space-time coordinates.
We're trying now. The trace is much stronger this time. There is every chance.
You must not fail.
Security forces are standing by. If we do get the coordinates, what are your instructions?
Whoever is operating the time machine is an enemy of the Daleks. All enemies of the Daleks must be destroyed. Exterminate them. Exterminate them. Exterminate them. Exterminate
them. Day of the Dalek.
Okay, you got it. Day of the Dalek.
Day of the Dalek, episode 2.
And how did you deduce that, episode 2?
I think it's no, episode 1, not episode 2, episode 1. Because they're in the cliff there, because the time machines happened, and that's the cliff. I just remember, I know that it's kind of the big reveal. You see, we know the Daleks are in it because it's in the title, but you don't really see them until the end of the episode.
You got it. You got it. You backed in. You got your 4 points on the very last question, and you have won that game of Guess That Cliffhanger. Awesome.
I've watched that one more recently, the other ones too. So.
All right, so Ross, where else can we find you in the podcasting sphere? What have you guys been up to story-wise on Gallifrey's Most Wanted, and what's the next episode you're recording for Runcible Report?
Well, it's not Runcible because Jeff's not in it, but I'm going to do a season overview of Season 4 with Cy Hart, and we're recording tomorrow night, and it will be up this Sunday following, and then Sunday me and Vic are recording Web of Fear, which will be up in 2 weeks or a week and a half. There's certain seasons I'm not going to do unless I'm doing it with Jeff.
Right.
So, but yes, we're going to talk Season 4. I let Cy pick which season he wanted of Troughton, and he said, well, this one's the biggest change. And I looked at it, went, yeah, it is. Starts as one show and ends as something totally different.
Are you doing televised season?
We're gonna talk about Hartnell's. Yeah, the season. We're gonna talk about the whole season.
The production season goes from 10th Planet to Tomb of the Cybermen, so it's a slight overlap.
No, we do it by television, the way it aired. I don't. When they're producing it, I don't. That's, to me, that's something different. It came out in that way, so you have to kind of look at it that way. I mean, the show was on just continuously at that point. You know, there wasn't really a break. Was there? I mean, were they taking any more than like 2 or 3 weeks off at that point? So, but yeah, I just do it the way they repackage in the DVDs. You know, it's kind of that poor season 21 has to end with that with the worst with Twin Dilemma.
Going from Caves of Androzani to Twin Dilemma is one of the greatest whiplashes in the show's history.
Oh my God, it's painful. It's painful. But yeah, you can, and then after that, I'm still planning what's going to be up. Me and Vic will be doing ours, but the off week ones when it's like something like comic books or a season, I haven't really planned it out. So.
All right, well, Ross, great having you on. I will have this episode released on Sunday, and we'll get to work picking the next book. And again, be careful what you wish for.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Doctor Who and the Horns of Nimon, written by Terrence Dix, televised as The Horns of Nimon, teleplay by Anthony Reed, televised in December 1979 and January 1980, published in October 1980, cover artist Steve Kyte. In the great maze of the power complex dwells the dreaded Nimon, a fearsome monster with immense scientific powers. The Nimon has promised to restore the Scanlan Empire to its former glory, but first it demands sacrifice. Youths and maidens from the peaceful planet Aneth. The TARDIS collides with the spaceship delivering the victims, and the captured Romana is condemned to be sacrificed to the Nimon. Aided by the faithful K9, the Doctor goes to the rescue. In the heart of the maze, he confronts the Nimon and uncovers a terrifying plot to enslave the galaxy. And now, a guest reading from Jim Sangster.
Prologue. The Coming of the Nimon. Next to the crumbling palace of the Emperor, on the edge of the sprawling ruins that were the capital of Skonos, there rose the power complex. It was a gleaming, metallic, star-shaped edifice, dominated by the 2 enormous horns that rose from its central unit. All around, mile upon mile of ruined and half-ruined buildings bore silent witness to the end of a once great star empire. No enemy had ever defeated the Skonons. They destroyed themselves. An aggressive race with a talent for war and conquest, they had discovered high technology and spaceflight much earlier than their neighbouring planets. Armed with superior weaponry, they had swept over the galaxy in an expanding wave of conquest. In an astonishingly short time, they were the masters of 100 worlds, the famous First Skonnan Empire. The aggressive streak that had brought them success was to cause their downfall. The noble families fell to fighting among themselves. Emperor followed emperor in quick succession, rival emperors set up against each other, and soon the Skonnan Empire, like ancient Rome before it, collapsed from within. Planet after planet took advantage of the confusion to throw off the Skonnan yoke. The occupying armies retreated, and the last devastating civil war was fought on Skonos itself. It left the planet in ruins. When the fighting ended, a handful of well-presented senior officers commanding a few squads of Skonnan troops were the sole survivors in a shattered capital, victors in a civil war that had ended through sheer exhaustion. Then came the Nimon. One day, a mysterious silver sphere appeared just outside the palace. General Sato, commander of the few remaining Skonnan troops, routed out Soldeed, a middle-aged laboratory technician, and sent him to investigate. Soldeed protested that he was no scientist. Sato pointed out that he was the nearest they'd got, and drove him out to the capsule at Blaster Point. Long hours later, Soldeed returned, swollen with new self-importance, and carrying a metal staff ending in 2 strange horn-like prongs. The sphere, he said, was the abode of a godlike being called the Nimon, who had come to offer help to the people of Skonos. Provided that the proper conditions were met, the Nimon was prepared to offer nothing less than the restoration of the Skonnan Empire. Soldeed was to be the voice of the Nimon from now on. Sato scoffed and demanded to see the Nimon for himself. Soldeed pointed the staff at him, a ray shot from the horns, and Sato fell dead. Captain Sorak, Sato's aide-de-camp, became a prompt convert to the Nimon's cause. So did the rest of the officers and their men. Under Soldeed's orders, work began. First, the power complex was constructed, swallowing up the original sphere which lay concealed somewhere at its centre. A spaceship was found and patched up into working order with the help of certain new equipment provided by the Nimon. Finally, all was ready, and the spaceship was dispatched on the Nimon's business. For the Nimon demanded tribute and sacrifice. 7 times the sacrifice was to be made. 7 youths and maidens of high birth were to be provided on each occasion, each carrying a crystal of hymetchisite, the most radioactive substance in the galaxy. Neither sacrifice nor tribute was available on Skonos, but fortunately the planet Aneth was their nearest neighbour. The Anethans were a peace-loving people, and their planet had suffered far less than Skonos itself in the Empire Wars. But when the Black Skonnan battlecruiser appeared in their skies, the memory of past defeats paralysed the Anethans with terror. Meekly, they handed over the sacrifices and tribute as demanded. 6 times already the sacrifice had taken place. The terrified young Anethans had been brought to Skonos as captives. Holding lead caskets of hymetchisite, they had been driven into the power complex, never to be seen again. Now the return of the battlecruiser with the 7th and final sacrifice was eagerly awaited on Skonos. But the 7th sacrifice failed to arrive on time.
This podcast is now over a year old, but I've been exploring the same theme for most of that time. The theme? It's about Terrence Dicks, who's written the vast majority of the books that we've discussed so far. But that's about to change. 1980 was the last ever target year that Terrence would write at least half of the published books. And the story in question tonight, The Horns of Nimon, was the last televised story of season 17. The last season, looking at Doctor Who in story order, where Terrence novelized at least half that season's stories. For seasons 18 through 23, Terrence would write less than half that season's books, and the 12 books of the Sylvester McCoy era, seasons 24 through 26, feature none by Terrence. So this is an inflection point moment for Doctor Who literature. There's going to be a lot less Terrence featured on this show from here on out. Oh, he'll write next week's book, the December 1980 release, but after that, he becomes just one author in the Target stable. Not the dominant figure in the line, who wrote 40 of 59 books between January 1973, Doctor Who and the Auton Invasion, and December 1980, next month's book. And we need to take a long look back at what he's done, and applaud, and cheer, and rave. For decades, the rap against Terrence's novelizations was that his books were too short, and that they were merely transcripts of the camera scripts, not adding anything interesting. Purely juvenile fare, some people would say, not me, not worthy of the lofty heights of the other writers to come in the Target stable. I bought into this criticism for a while. I mean, just on the pure math alone, it's easy to assume that a guy who wrote at least 8 novelizations a year, many of them barely cracking 100 pages each, was going to cut corners and put out some pretty rote, unmemorable work. Doctor Who and the Horns of Nimon is one of 11 books that Target put out in 1980, and Terrence wrote 10 of those alone, if you include the junior novelization of The Brain of Morbius, which we will not be discussing on this show. Only friend of the podcast, Philip Hinchcliffe, with Doctor Who and the Keys of Marinus, episode 59, got a book in 1980, to keep Terrence from monopolizing the year all to himself. What amazes me about the Horns of Nimon novelization, then, is that, coming towards the end of a stretch where Terrence will have written 10 books in 13 months, he still manages to be a wizard of clever, economic word choices, sly jabs at the original script or its characters, and razor-sharp insights. This is a short book. Like the previous month's Nightmare of Eden, episode 60, it's only 105 pages of text, but I promise you, it's got something to get you to nod your head vigorously with on nearly every page. Now, Terrence starts off with a prologue, which is something he typically reserved for more epic stories. Nimon on TV, as produced and directed, certainly does not look epic, but the story is based on Greek mythology. So the prologue, which Jim Sangster so expertly read for us a moment ago, casts the backstory in overtly classical terms, with its talk of imperial family infighting and rival emperors, and the direct allusion to ancient Rome. Terrence loves his politics, so you can see why he wanted to add that prologue. This is the opposite of rush job hack work. Names are given to the Scanlan battlecruiser pilot, Sekoth, who isn't around for long, and co-pilot, Sardor, who is. I don't know if these names came from an older Anthony Reed draft of the story, or if Terrence made them up, but now every Scanlan character name starts with an S. That's S as in Skanos, and that tells you something about the mindset of the characters who live on that planet. We also learned that Soldeed was a lowly lab tech who stumbled into his role as Scanlan leader quite by accident. Soldeed is said to have grown his, quote, pointed beard in an effort to add authority to his otherwise undistinguished features. Now, hopefully, Graham Crowden, who played Soldeed on TV, didn't read that page and shout out, "I'm not undistinguished!" You will find that the characters in the book are more muted than on TV, as the book omits any changes to the script added in rehearsal. And by the way, if you happen to be in possession of it, rehearsal videotape of Tom Baker and Graham Crowden egging each other on to more and more scenery-chewing excess would be something I'd watch like every single day. Sardor, in the book, the co-pilot, does not repeatedly shout, "Weakling scum!" to the faces of the Anethan tributes, and Soldeed does not try to pull his face off while shouting about his dreams of conquest. Tom Baker does not pin a rosette on K9 or give him mouth-to-mouth, but there is enough wit in Reed's original scripts that the book is still funny, without those extra ad-libs. And Terrence does call K9 the Doctor's valued, if sometimes irritating, companion, which is great. On the other hand, Terrence really digs deep into the characters, and they come off in the book a little bit differently than on television. For example, he burrows pretty deep into the head of Sorak, Soldeed's lieutenant, and walks us thought by thought how Sorak becomes disenchanted with his boss and looks for ways to relieve him of command. On TV, the Doctor says in Part 4 that Sorak won't be much better than Soldeed as Skanos' new ruler. In the book, Terrence leaves Sorak with a more optimistic fate, which is justified by all these Sorak POV scenes we get before that. Of course, Soldeed doesn't do too badly in print either. We learn that he's, quote, merely bluffing with his shows of confidence. Terrence, in fact, basically turns Soldeed into Greek tragedy, if that can be said about a story that's about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. When Sorak questions the Nimon's generosity, we learn in the book that, quote, Soldeed had sometimes wondered the same thing, but he pretended to be outraged. On TV, you feel sad when Soldeed dies, because Graham Crowden played him so vividly. In the book, you feel sad when he dies because Terrence has made him quite the unfortunate sap.
You meddlesome hussy, do not touch the sacrifices!
It's all over, Soldeed, you're finished.
No, the Nimon will fulfill his great promise! The Nimon be praised!
The Nimon be praised? How many Nimons have you seen today?
Don't dare blaspheme the Nimon!
How many?
Skanos will...
How many Nimons?
3. I have seen 3.
Well, I've just seen a whole lot more rampaging down the corridor. Face it, Soldeed, you're being invaded.
He said he was the only one, the last survivor of his race.
He told you what you wanted to hear, promised you what you wanted to have.
So this is a great journey of life.
They're parasitic nomads who've been feeding off your selfishness and gullibility.
My dreams of conquest. You have brought this calamity upon me!
You've brought it on yourself!
You will die for your interference!
Stop him!
You fool! You are all doomed! Doomed!
Apart from the extra work on the characters, there's a lot of other rich prose, bits of invention, and subtle plot fixes, all Terrence's stock in trade. Chapter 2 opens, "It was a dark and stormy day." I can't even. Remembering that 1980 was the height of Charles M. Schulz's ongoing Snoopy as writer storyline, where every single one of Snoopy's manuscripts began "It was a dark and stormy night." So way to go, Terrence, for honoring both Bulwer Lytton, the author of the original line, and reveling in that late 70s cultural zeitgeist. Terrence restructures the Part 1 cliffhanger to remove the Nimon's appearance, and pushes it back into the Part 2 material. The first description of the Nimon compares it to a buffalo, or, quote, a bull that had learned to talk and walk upon his hind legs like a man. The description of the Nimon's head having, quote, no suggestion of a neck, is a clever cover for the Nimon's necklace on-screen costume. not to mention covering the prolonged silence of all those non-equity extras playing the Anithan sacrifices, who are in nearly every scene on TV but never say a word, by explaining that, quote, they're too frightened even to talk. That's a zinger. Terence also continues his trend of describing brunettes as fair-haired, remembering he had Harry Sullivan as fair-haired in several earlier books, and here the raven-haired beauty, Janet Ellis, is, quote, fair-haired, playing Tika. Seth tells Tika to shut up at one point in the book, which thankfully was never part of the TV episodes. But Terence also provides a description of K9's battery cycle, regenerative powers, and fear of heights, which almost makes up for the weaker portrayal of Tika. The ending includes Terence adding material to cover up some plot holes from the rushed finale. Quote, they hadn't left immediately after the explosion. And he has the Doctor advising Sorak on how to be a better leader. The Doctor also tells Romana, as well as all the 9-year-olds reading the book in 1980, the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, making more obvious in print what was only heavily winked at on TV. In short, this is a little book, but Terence does not waste a word. Character insights, classical allusions, lots of wit. It may not be as farcical, or, if you will, whimsical as the TV episodes, but Terence brings Anthony Reed's scripts to life all the same. All of that in only 105 pages. Terence can be the ruler of my own power complex. Any day. Next time, on Doctor Who Literature, it's the end of 1980. Season 18 is in full swing. Peter Howell has already supplanted Dudley Simpson as Doctor Who's main composer. We have a dazzling new Starfield title sequence, and a new neon tube logo. But that new logo won't adorn the books for nearly another year. Instead, for the December 1980 target release, we're going to jump back in time, all the way back to the John Pertwee era. In fact, the first Pertwee book in 2.5 years, since July 1978's Death to the Daleks novelization. The book in question is a sequel to an earlier Pertwee episode and novelization, but a story that's already so old that the TV story's author is deceased by the time the sequel book comes out, and Terence will jump ably into the breach to assume novelization duties. As we return to the planet Peladon, I'll be joined by a first-time guest, and I'm looking forward to that conversation about Doctor Who and the monster of Peladon. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. Special thanks to my special guest, Ross Aitken. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at anchor.fm/DoctorWhoLit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Doctor Who Novels, that's DrWho Novels. You can find my old tweets about the entire series under the hashtag Doctor Who Pilgrimage, that's DrWho Pilgrimage. My current Twilight Zone watch-through under hashtag TZ Pilgrimage, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
Direction point!
A Doctor Who Podcast Network.